Welcome, everyone. My name is Melissa Westlake. I'm the head of exhibits at the museum. Amy Harris, of course, would normally be here doing this role, but she had something come up and wasn't able to be here today. So I'll be filling the role of our moderator today. So with great pleasure, I welcome you to this informal conversation about our latest or our first virtual exhibit about whale evolution. um, oh, I didn't get a chance. There was a slide that went right by, but I wanted to thank you for your support as members and as donors, because we simply just wouldn't have made it through this last year without your help and support by participating in our events or just sending a note to tell us how much you appreciate the museum. We love hearing from you. So technical details, this event today is being recorded and will be made available to those who couldn't make it today. If you can please remain muted, that would be great. That'll allow us to have our speakers able to really be heard. And if you have questions, you can put them in the chat. We'll do 2 rounds of question and answer, one after this update section right now, and one after the content of the program. So you'll have a chance to ask questions at both opportunities. If you want to see different things, you can click on view in the upper right corner to get a different screen layout. That may help you to enjoy the program better. You can hide the closed captions if you wish to, and you can ask any technical questions in the chat as well, and someone will try and get back to you with an answer. So today, I'm going to give you a quick museum update. Then we're going to spend about a half an hour talking about our newest exhibit, Whale Evolution from Land to Sea. We have 2 good friends from the paleontology department here today, and 2 of us on staff to give you a bunch of different perspectives about what this exhibit was like to put together and what it focuses on. As I said before, you can put your questions in the chat, and we will also send you a survey after the program is done to get your feedback about how the program was and what we can do to make it better or make similar events better in the future. As you may know, we are currently only open to faculty and staff, people with current U of M card. And while we are hoping to reopen to the public soon, we have to wait and see what happens with the COVID numbers in our community. So hang in for an announcement, hopefully sometime soon, but right now we really don't know when that'll be. But excitingly for all of you, members and donors will be invited back first. Another exciting update is in addition to the whale evolution exhibit, we also are launching shortly our a virtual experience of our research stations. As you may know, our research stations are an in-person exhibit experience that we have at the museum. They talk about individual researchers and their and the research they do, and also they really focus on the person and what inspired them to do research and to go into this field. We realized that with the museum closed, and since these are only temporary, but they're really a wonderful way to reach people and inspire them to want to learn more about becoming a scientist themselves. We accelerated our plans to put these up online and make them into a virtual experience. So you're getting a first peek at these. They're not live on our website yet. They'll be released to the public next week. And we will also be launching a survey. 2 of these research stations are funded through the broader impacts portion of research NSF grants. And so we are, for those two particular exhibits, we are soliciting. Normally we would do this kind of evaluation in person in the museum, but since we don't know when that will be possible, we are trying to do it in an online format. And so when you do go and hopefully look at these on our website, I do hope that you will take that quick survey for us and help us to improve our exhibits. Just a reminder that we are doing private virtual tours, and virtual planetarium shows are also available. We offer a discount for members, and either one makes a great virtual birthday party or just an opportunity to get together with family and friends in a safe way. Also, virtual summer camp registration is now open. It runs from June 14th to August 13th. And I believe Nora's provided the link so that you can go and register for that. It was really well received last summer, and we're hoping to also offer our typical in-person camp this summer as well, but we are still waiting for university approval of that. Also, just want to put a shout out, as many of you know, Matt Linke, who has worked at the museum for 32 years as our planetarium manager and is well loved, is retiring on June 30th of this year. So we have already launched the search for his replacement, never his replacement, but his, not predecessor, whoever comes after him. And the search is underway, but we will really miss Matt. So before we move on to our presentation, does anyone have any questions about any of the updates I just gave? Let's see if I can see the chat. I don't see any in the chat. Does anyone want to ask a question? Okay, you guys. Yeah, we're all excited to have. I have to say, as someone said, they're excited to get back in person. And I have to say, as someone who works in museums, the whole point is to offer our exhibits and our programming to visitors. And it's really sad to see the museum with so few people in it. We do get about, I'd say, 40 or so visitors every week on the staff and faculty and student days that we're open. So it's not empty, but it, compared to what we had before, it's really a lot less. So before we dive into today's presentation, Nora was going to launch a poll for us. I'm curious to know who has been to the, or who, not who has been to, but who has checked out our new whale evolution exhibit already and who hasn't. Get a sense of where everybody is coming from. All right. I think you can see the results now on your screen. It looks like most of you have not, which is exciting. So this will be all new to you. For those of you who have, hopefully this will give you some more information about how it got made. So first, I'd like to introduce my esteemed colleagues here who will be chatting with me about this exhibit. First, I'd like to introduce Dr. Carlos Mauricio Peredo, who is an assistant professor and Michigan Fellow in Earth and Environmental Science, and he's going to talk to us about the content here about how whales evolved. Next, I'd like to introduce Dr. Adam Rountree, who's in the Museum of Paleontology. He is a research museum collections manager and a 3D specialist with the University of Michigan Online Repository of Fossils, or UMORPH, which is a really great resource that you guys will learn about today if you don't already know about. And he's going to specifically talk about that and collection digitization and um, the reach that 3D imaging can offer to collections. And then Allison Campbell, who is my colleague here at the museum, she is our exhibit graphic designer and collections assistant, and she's going to talk to you about the challenges of doing virtual exhibit design, especially in a startup platform that is changing all the time, even as you're designing the exhibit. So without further ado, Allison, would you mind opening up our exhibit and sharing your screen? So I think to start with, Allison is going to navigate us around a little bit so that you can get a sense of what we're talking about here. But Carlos, I'd love for you to start. Can you talk a little bit, or actually before you even start, let me say how this exhibit came to be in the first place. As you can imagine, we shut down, we closed our doors over a year ago, and we were really struggling with how to engage the public with our exhibits while we were closed. And while we came up with some ways in which to allow undergraduate classes to access the parts of the exhibits to use for their learning, and a couple of other things, I personally felt really strongly. A lot of museums were doing 360 images of their galleries, or putting up these sort of long form blog posts with the content from their exhibits with pictures that looked sort of like magazine articles. And I really felt strongly that that was not the way that our museum should go. And I felt like if we were going to do virtual exhibits, that they really needed to offer something that our physical exhibits couldn't, and to offer a different experience that was different from what we had in the museum, and hopefully even better. And so one of the members of our exhibits team, Todd Behrens, he was looking into it a little bit, and he found this local startup called SaganWorks that was offering basically a visual data storage solution. And he got excited about how that might translate to using it for exhibits. So we started exploring it, and we thought about the different pieces of content in the museum already that might readily translate to this medium. And partly we were trying to do something that wouldn't require a ton of new research and new development of content, but also we were talking to different staff members and teachers and thinking about the subjects that would be most useful to them. And that's how we landed on this, because currently in the museum, we have some content about whale evolution, but it is spread through different galleries and different spaces. And we also had a ton more information in our archives that wasn't on display. So we thought it would be a great topic. And it also was a topic that several of the faculty and teachers that we talked to said they would really utilize. And it's been utilized by 2 or 3 classes, university classes this semester, and an entire grade, the 7th grade of the Ann Arbor public schools also have utilized it. So it's been really exciting to see how it's been used and how it went out in the world. With that long introduction, now I would love, Carlos, one of the first things we did was to contact you and say, hey, can you help us take all of this disparate information and bring it all into one place, which you were really helpful in doing. Can you talk to us a little about what that was like and how the content came together?
Absolutely. Yeah. Thank you, Melissa. As mentioned, my name is Dr. Pareto. I am a paleontologist here at the University of Michigan. And when the opportunity to work on this, was presented to me, I was immediately ecstatic that whales were being chosen because the truth is that whales are sort of a poster organism for understanding evolution in its broadest sense. As a paleontologist, everybody always asks, why don't you work on dinosaurs? And don't get me wrong, I love dinosaurs. But the real reason that I work on whales is because they are one of the most extreme and one of the most unusual examples of mammalian evolution. And this exhibit in particular is really gonna really highlight that. It's gonna tell the story of how you go from a terrestrial mammal to something that can live in the water and become a whale. So, whales ancestrally are related to a group that we call artiodactyls. That's a group that includes pigs and deer and cattle and goats. And the earliest whales, like some of the images that you're seeing here, really were I usually describe them almost like a hyena hippo pig, which is terrifying and adorable and interesting all at the same time, right? And if we imagine a mammal that is going to evolve to be marine, we have all these challenges that we have to circumvent in order to do it, right? How are we going to feed? Are we going to feed above or below water? Are we going to hear above or below water? How are we going to breathe? What about this whole live birth thing, right? We're mammals, we give live birth. How are we going to do that once we're in the ocean? And this exhibit really touches on all of these different transitions, all of these different changes in anatomy that have to happen and changes in behavior that have to happen in order for a mammal to excel in the water. And so I think that the story of whale evolution was ready made for an exhibit like this. It's a beautiful textbook narrative that allows us to tell a story about how mammals evolve, and in particular in one of the most extreme fashions. But of course, in order to do all of that, you don't just have to have the science, but you have to be able to do the art that goes with the science, right? You have to be able to take the science and package it into a nice narrative and into a digital format. And that's really where my colleague, Dr. Rountree, came in, because he's been working on the digitization for many, many years already and had kind of perfected, I think, the methodology that streamlined this for us. So I'll kick to Adam there.
Thanks, Carlos. Um, if could we maybe walk over so we could get a view of sort of Doradon's head and maybe front of the skeleton? Um, so I'm Adam Rountree. I'm a collection manager at and 3D specialist at the Museum of Paleontology, um, and I'm going to talk about some of how we get fossil specimens into 3D space and what that allows us to do. Um, but I wanted to step back a bit before getting into all of the scanning and the digital and all of that, and think about the steps that had to happen before we even get to that point. So for Doradon, that means going back about 40 million years to a shallow marine environment in what would be now present day Egypt. And we have a few Doradon individuals swimming around that met their unfortunate end, perhaps not violently, since we don't see any evidence of that on these particular specimens. But they met their end and sank to the bottom of this shallow marine environment. And in some cases, the currents and scavengers sort of disarticulated bones, and there was decomposition, and things moved apart. But in other really important cases, those carcasses fell to the floor of the sea and were buried very quickly before decomposition or scavenging could take place. And when those individuals were buried, it meant that the relationships between individual bones were preserved after burial, and they were preserved for 40 million years until paleontologists came along working in Wadi Hatan, the Valley of the Whales in Egypt, and decided to excavate what they saw peeking out of the rock there. So those bones would have been jacketed, so covered in plaster along with the sediment to protect them and hold them in place, and brought back to the University of Michigan for preparation. So each individual bone then was removed from the surrounding sediment. In some cases, they had to be hardened so they could support their own weight without the sediment around. And then if we want to do something like create a full skeleton mount, like you see digitally here in front of you, then nowadays we would normally do that with casts instead of the original bones, since it's easier to do with casts and it does less damage to the original bones. So each individual bone was molded and casts were made and painted, and they were assembled onto an armature that made it look like a skeleton. And how do we know that the bones go where they go? Well, remember those individuals that died and were buried quickly. We have really strong evidence for things like the number of vertebrae in the backbone, even though some individuals aren't preserved that way. So at the time the skeleton was put on an exhibit in the Museum of Natural History back over at the Ruthven building, there were some 3D technologies that were available that could have been used to produce an okay 3D scan of this, but it would have been expensive and time consuming, and it wouldn't have sort of met our modern expectations for what a 3D model should look like. But during the museum move that happened a couple years ago now, all the museums moving out of the Ruthven building, the gallery was closed for a bit, and so there was a really good opportunity to try to get 3D models of hard to reach specimens like Dorodon and other things that were coming off display. So we had a team of U of M undergrads who were working in that space, creating 3D models of basically everything that was coming off display for use in future education, research, and outreach, like you see here in this new exhibit. So some of those started going up a few years ago on our UMorph site, the University of Michigan Online Repository of Fossils. And we're super excited to see them used in this different environment where it's more like a traditional museum setting. If you look closely at the, say the teeth here or some aspects of the skull, you'll see a little bit of pointiness and triangles and stuff. And that's because there's all of this other content in the virtual room that needs to be loaded and other skeletons, and you want to be able to play with this on your phone. So this is a reduced resolution model. The original full resolution model has 65,000 times higher resolution, which is way too big to share online. But if you want to view a compromise, you can go to the UMorph website. You can click on it from the Sagan and pull up the skeleton, and look at details of the skeleton there. So there are other specimens that would be familiar from natural history. On UMorph, there are other archaeocete specimens. The mastodons are on there. And we also have some things that you can 3D print. For example, we have some ankle bones of some archaeocetes that you can download and 3D print and compare them to deer or pig or sheep or whatever you have around. If you want to really look at that evidence, at some of the evidence that supports this link between artiodactyls and whales. So I'm going to stop there for my my spiel and let Allison, I think, take over and talk a little bit about how you plan and put together a virtual space like this. So this is UMorph that she's showing, but you can access that through the new exhibit as well.
Yeah, I'll add that we did very carefully dust off years and years of dust rather, before they did the 3D models.
Well, I will add to that. Here's an Easter egg. There is a missing piece of Dorodon that we didn't notice when we were doing the the scanning, and so it's missing a little bit of a finger in the digital model, but that was fixed afterwards, so the physical one does have all of its fingers.
Allison, I got a front seat to what a different process it was to design for a virtual exhibit rather than a physical exhibit. Could you talk to us a little bit about what was different? And then probably also about the challenges of developing something on a platform that was constantly changing on you.
Yeah, of course. I am gonna reload the second while because we were just in UMorph while I'm talking, and I apologize if when I go back into the second I get super pixelated. Because as Adam mentioned, a lot of the sort of files get pixelated, not necessarily my Zoom video, but a lot of our graphic files and these larger models have to be broken down into pixels to be displayed in a virtual format, which is a lot different, obviously, than designing for a physical exhibition. So to start, we had SaganWorks, this new startup, and we basically had a room, and it was just the room that you're looking at now, but it was completely empty. And we had essentially these three, what I'll call anchor pieces. So we had the Pygmy Whale, which is our modern whale. We had Myocetus, and then we had Durodon. And then the whole room was basically this blank canvas to design the rest of the exhibit around. And I think specifically a lot of the challenges for designing for this sort of online virtual platform relate a lot to accessibility. And again, as Adam mentioned, if you want the exhibit to be able to play on somebody's cell phone, because their SaganWorks does have a Android and an iOS app that you can download to explore this exhibit, you have to kind of design on a grid and break all of these graphics up so that they will be high enough resolution for you to be able to read the text. So essentially everything within the exhibit is designed in a sort of puzzle piece manner, and you'll kind of find that as you explore. This was one of the limitations to the software, but also, as I had mentioned, it's really good for accessibility. Somebody can access the exhibit on like a Chromebook. You don't have to have the best, newest computer to be able to get the exhibit up and running, which is very important that as many people can access and view it as possible. So you'll notice the graphics are kind of cut out in this way where they are puzzled together. And yeah, I don't know if anyone has any questions or what people are interested in about. Basically, the overall concept for the design of this was this sort of like wave going around to show the, because obviously waves, whales in the water, but also to show the kind of non-linear narrative of whale evolution and how unique it is. And I'll also mention that designing for a virtual space, it's interesting because you would think that with a physical exhibit, you want everything to be exactly at eye level. But in a virtual space, you'll notice you can get graphics closer up to the ceiling. You can get things down close to the floor where you would not be able to do that in a physical space. It would be very strange to be in an exhibit and have text or graphic down this low or up this high. So there's a lot of both kind of like limitations, but also advantages to this. And it was really fun and really a challenge to learn this new software. So I hope you guys enjoy exploring it.
Someone was asking how close is the virtual exhibit to the actual installation. I'm assuming that's the size of the 3D models that we're talking about of the whale skeletons. Allison, do you want to talk about that?
Yeah, so I'm sure that Carlos and Adam know better than I do the scale. We tried our best to get these to scale. Or to an example scale. So basically, this exhibit would be kind of, I mean, not nearly impossible, but it seems like kind of an impossible exhibit in real life because of the scale of these models. specifically this pygmy whale model. The room basically, like you could scale these as big or as small as we want. So they are not like a life size. They're just kind of scaled relative to one another. But if you were to I mean, Carlos or Adam, do you want to jump in with like an estimate of the pygmy whale?
Yeah, I'll jump in happily. The pygmy right whale is actually one of our smaller baleen whales today, and this touches on an interesting limitation and challenge, not just with real life exhibits, but even with these digital exhibits. Early on in the design process, we had delusions of a digital blue whale in this space. And for those that might not be aware, blue whales can measure over 90 feet long. And the reality was that even in a digital space, it was so much bigger than all of the other stuff that everything else would have to be tiny in order for you to have any kind of context as you were walking around a blue whale fin. And so it's a really interesting lesson and for us in terms of the challenge that is, even when you're working in a digital space, as Adam touched on, a blue whale is enormous from a file size standpoint. It's very hard to load a digital file that large, but also it's still physically large and it still presented physical space limitations even in its digital format. I'll also highlight the pygmy right whale here was the model was generously provided by some colleagues in Melbourne from one of the museums in Australia, and it's a particular big deal for us to have it here because to my knowledge, there are only 2 museums that have pygmy right whales on display in the Northern Hemisphere. That is the Museum of Natural History in London and the Smithsonian in Washington, D.C. And so because pygmy right whales are native only to the Southern Hemisphere, they're not frequently found in collections and they're very, very rarely found in exhibits in the Northern Hemisphere. And so having this digital collection, this digital space where we can exhibition a pygmy right whale, it's a really interesting and a really special treat for us here to be able to do this, because now this is now accessible to people all over the world. If you have an internet connection and decent software, you can probably come see this exhibition, and we think that's really neat and really special.
Yeah, I think it's a really nice point to pull out, Carlos, that this designing in a virtual format, while it proposed a lot of challenges and caused us to work a little bit differently, it really did present a lot of opportunities, though not endless. And so we don't have our own whale, a 3D model that we could just pull from UMMMNH. And we really had to look around and eventually we found another museum that was kind enough to allow us to use this one. But I think, it allows us to bring, the virtual environment also allows us to bring sound bites and video and all sorts of different media together in a way that is easier than in the gallery, because in the gallery you'd have to set up a touch screen and figure out, an interface that doesn't get crashed by, smart kids who are hacking on it all the time and all the other things that come with that. Allison, I don't know if you want to demonstrate quickly how to what one of the video or audio file things might be, show the platforms and how they work, or the pedestals.
Sure, let's go over, just because we're near it, let's preview the Meet Do or Don. So there's multiple of these videos throughout. They're from actual exhibit content that I believe they were used in Ruthven.
And actually many of the videos are still on display in the new museum as well.
So you just double click them and then it's basically a link and it'll take you right to YouTube where you can watch the videos. I don't want to play it just in case
we get some really weird feedback.
Yeah, in case it pauses. Yeah, I also think going off of what Carlos and Melissa both just said, and Melissa may have already mentioned this, another really cool thing about this virtual exhibit platform is that just the kind of freedom to be able to get up so close to these whales and models, which I think we were kind of all hinted at with the size and scale of them, but also just getting this close to these specimens and being able to interact in that sort of a way. You can, if you'll notice, if you walk, it'll just like take you right through them. So you can just go. And in the actual museum where Durodon and Myocetus are, they're so high above your head that you just never be able to see them with this much detail. So that's another really cool benefit of this format.
Yeah, as Adam alluded to, they are so high that we couldn't 3D image them. We could, and you certainly can't walk through the belly of any of our whales that are hanging from the ceiling. Before we go to questions, I wondered if each of you have sort of a favorite thing that you want to mention about this exhibit or about working on it. Carlos, if you have something, do you want to start?
Sure, yeah. I think my favorite part of this exhibit, because it's near and dear to my heart and the science that I do, is the section where we talk about how whales ancestrally chewed their food, and when they lived on land, they chewed their food. And somewhere along the way in whale evolutionary history, they do all these weird things with their teeth, and they lose the ability to chew, and they lose the ability to cut, and they start swallowing their food whole. And that's a big part of what I study and what I work on the day-to-day as my day job, so to say. And so I was very excited that I got the chance to slip a little bit of that in here as part of the full story that is how the heck do whales get to the water. So that's my favorite part.
Pretty fun. Adam, I know UMorph, being able to showcase UMorph is a pretty awesome opportunity for us to rely on the resources that you've created. I don't know if that's your favorite part or if you have another.
No, I mean, I think it's great that we're able to use these resources in different ways. And I think my favorite part is the context. So when you go on UMorph, for example, anything you look at basically will be on a blue background by itself, out of context. It's sort of like a sculpture on a pedestal surrounded by black or whatever, right? And this is, I think the new exhibit is very different because you're seeing bits of the environment and their history, and it's all brought together in a way that gives more meaning maybe to what you're seeing in the 3D model. So I think it's fantastic.
And I'll say that context and the visual part of this is probably my favorite part of the exhibit, certainly one of them. And I'd love to give full credit to Allison as the designer who put it all together. Allison, what's your favorite part?
I think my favorite part, other than the giant whale models, because I think those are really neat, I like the timeline. I think it's, as somebody who doesn't study whales and is just a design-minded person, I think it's super helpful to just be able to see kind of the unique trajectory of the evolution and to have that all in one space. So kudos to you guys for organizing and outlining the exhibit in that way.
Well, after that love fest, I think we are just about at time to go to question and answer from all of you. I can see that a couple of questions have already come in over the chat that we can address. I'd like to invite anyone else who has questions, who hasn't put them in the chat, to please do so that we can also address yours. And thank you also for just sharing this new experience with us. We're excited that you guys could join us today to do that. So going to questions, let me just get back to the beginning here. Someone's asking about testing on different platforms. There's for example, mobile versus not mobile, and different operating systems and devices. Uh, we SaganWorks does a fair bit of testing for this. We did not do extensive testing, though we did discover, I don't even remember what it was, um, that on my uh, the mobile app for Android wasn't, when we were getting ready to launch, wasn't working. And people who were trying to get onto it, it just got caught in a loop. So I immediately called up SaganWorks and said, hey, two of us over here at the museum who were both on Android, we can't get it to work. And he was, the developer over there was like, but all of our people over here can. And I sort of said, well, it's possible that our devices aren't quite as next generation as yours are. Maybe that's the problem. And so we figured out what the problem was, and they were able to resolve it before we launched it. So then another question is, any thoughts about doing some animations with skeletons, adding musculature or models in the virtual space that wouldn't be possible in a physical space? That's an interesting idea. Outside of probably my realm, Carlos or Adam, do you want to take that one?
I think what that question touches on is the really fascinating and, in my mind, sort of limitless potential of what a lot of digital data can do. I've had the privilege to work with a lot of digital data so far in my career, a lot of CT scans and high resolution 3D models, and certainly Adam, even more so than me, has a lot of experience in that realm. And one of the things that it frequently strikes me is that when we do these kinds of things with this kind of digital data sets, that somewhere out there, and I see several young people in the audience here, and so I think it's important to highlight, somewhere out there, there is a middle schooler that has grown up with an iPad or a MacBook in their lap the entire time, and they are way more digital and tech savvy than some of us at this stage in our career. And the reality is that when we collect digital data like this, the sky is the limit. I really think that things that seem unimaginable right now will be incredibly routine and mundane a decade from now. And so for me, at least, the really exciting part is that we're sort of always at the cutting edge of what can we do with this sorts of stuff. Right now, I would look at the thought of, oh, could we do something with musculature and do models like that? And I would say, boy, that would be really hard. But 2 years ago, I would have said the same thing about what we've just done. So I actually do think the sky is the limit. I really think that as technology advances and bright young people keep getting better and better at using it, I think we can do a lot with digital data. I really do.
We have a model that was created of the Basilosaurus musculature and a concept of what the skin and exterior would have looked like. And I asked Adam about whether we could make a 3D model of that. And, interestingly, one of the things he said was at that time was that it's a completely glossy, shiny surface. And so he did not think that it would translate well into a 3D model, which is too bad because, that would have been at least a way to take the physical object and transition it into the virtual. Adam, I'll let you add to that.
I was just thinking about the animation. I guess there's sort of two aspects to that question. One is the visual, right? So it would be amazing to see like Doradon swim and have that all figured out. But the second part is figuring that out, right? So there have been and to figure it out, you would want to look at models of individual bones where you have all of the joint surfaces there, a model, soft tissue that would have been there. And a little bit of that has been done on Rhodocetus in-house on just a short series of vertebrae. But a study like that would produce enough information to, give a sort of faithful representation for the whole skeleton would would definitely be a lot of work. But I can imagine other ways of doing it. So, you could make it interactive, just like, well, what would it be like if, the limit of motion on this joint was this much? Like, what would the swimming style look like? So there are ways to use animations, I think, that we could do before we even have, all of the biomechanical modeling that we would need to do those.
An interesting question here. Would having a doorway to the exhibit make it seem more real? There is actually the opportunity to have doorways between rooms and to put the content in more than one room. This exhibit did not lend itself to that because the models were so big and we would have had to split them up, and it just wouldn't have made sense. Really, for this, we needed a big open space. But I don't know if they offer a doorway at all, just as an option. Allison, do you? Like, if it's not going anywhere, just as a visual?
I don't think there is a doorway, actually. There are more like walls and other movable things, but no doorways.
Yeah, Allison, actually, do you want to talk a little bit about the sort of furniture gallery and how you get the things that you need to put in the space? We could have put tables and lamps and chairs, resting areas for people to sit down if we'd wanted to. We chose not to because it seemed extraneous and we had so much stuff to cram in there already. But Allison, do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Sure. Yeah. One of my colleagues, Todd, and I spent a lot of time kind of back and forth looking at other SAGANs. If you go to their website, there's a lot out there. And a lot of the ones that are in more of like an art museum context, it do have like chairs or furniture or a lamp, and the lamp actually lights up and, casts a shadow. And I think with the idea of a virtual exhibit, I kind of mentioned earlier the eye level and how that's not really necessary to design around eye level when you could kind of adjust that to your own preferences via your own computer or your phone. And I think with these kind of virtual spaces, there's this idea of creating something that's like a duplicate of a physical space or a duplicate of something that feels very real. And kind of designing around the idea of like the uncanny valley and not wanting to make something that looks so real that you get caught up in like being in the space, like just kind of less, I guess we tried to make it in a way that you focus mostly on what's in front of you instead of getting caught up in feeling like you're in this virtual space.
Well, I'll come back to that. Another question, was, since you're not limited to physical space, how do you know when the exhibit is complete? Do you find yourself tempted to keep adding appropriately sized objects and other content? One of the things that's neat about working, there's ups and downs to working with a startup. They're developing their product all the time, which can have downsides. Allison very politely didn't mention that they did a huge upgrade the day before we launched the exhibit, and she had to go back in. She showed you how she had to split all the graphics into these little pieces, puzzle pieces. Well, she had to load all of the graphics again the day before we launched it, even though it was already done, because the upgrade caused all the graphics to show differently. So those are the challenges, but the upsides are that they're developing new things all the time. And we are hoping that soon they'll be developing the opportunity to do interactive things, so that we could have quizzes, or we could have little games inside of the exhibit space, which I think would be really cool. I think while there are a lot of temptations to keep adding, that space is pretty jam-packed full already. But also it's a question of staff capacity. We found that this project did take a lot of time, partly just because we'd never done it before and we were learning the whole way through. partly also because once we learned one way to do it, then it changed and we had to learn another way to do it. So I think we'd love to add some games or quizzes or that kind of little interactive elements if that becomes available. But I don't see us doing a major overhaul, partly just because of capacity. We're hoping to get all of our physical exhibits polished and changed over now so that someday we can welcome all the public back again into the physical museum as well.
Melissa, if I could jump in there too,
Yeah.
because I think that brings up a really interesting point that for me at least, one of the really exciting things about working in a digital space like this is that it does give the opportunity to change as it needs to, right? When you design a physical space, hopefully that exhibit's going up for a couple decades, right? And so you do your best to have the most cutting edge science at the time that you put it up, and it's pretty quickly kind of outdated or old news, right? And you don't really get to update exhibits, maybe physical exhibits, in the same way that you'd like. But something like this, there's a lot of freedom there, but I imagine also a lot of challenge. Maybe Melissa or Allison can speak a little bit about, from a management standpoint, how much upkeep now goes into something like this. Is it different? Is it much harder, much maybe easier than a physical exhibit?
I think only time will tell. Allison, what do you predict? And then we will probably need to wrap up after that.
Yeah, I don't think it's necessarily easier or harder. I think it's just probably going to be really different. I see a lot of questions about like accessibility. I think with that, there's again, this because the software is from a startup, it's constantly changing. Will hopefully down the line pretty soon be the option for us to do a guided tour, which you can kind of toggle on and off. So that would be something that we could add to kind of enhance the experience, or as Melissa kind of noted, these sort of interactive things that we had spoken about doing. But yeah, and there's also the idea of like, how do we make sure that if there's any sort of new kind of information that comes out, going back and updating the files, or adding kind of text descriptions to the images. Like, I know just from my side, I would like to be able to do that for people with visual impairment, and just kind of go back over and make sure the exhibit is like truly as accessible as it can be for everyone.
I'll say that one maintenance thing that's a real benefit is that our visitors are particularly destructive and they cannot destroy this, nor do we need to dust it. So with that, I know there's a couple of questions in the chat that we did not get a chance to get around to. Maybe we'll have a chance to follow up on those separately. I do want to thank you all for coming today. I particularly want to thank Carlos, Allison, and Adam for coming and sharing your perspectives with us, and for all the work you did to make this exhibit happen. So as I said, we'll be sending out a feedback form we welcome your input on what you like about today's program and how we can improve our future programs. And if you have an unanswered question, actually, that is a great place to put it, and we can address it and send you an answer. So thank you, everybody, for coming. It was great to see you.